I have a reading, which is not very often, but I host a lot of readings, and what I always encourage people to do is to tell stories. That sounds really so simple, but I was watching a recording on YouTube at a conference. There were two fellows on stage being interviewed by a third fellow. Those two fellows were former President Bush, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. And one of the things that Bill talked about and emphasized greatly, he said, you know, I grew up before television. We didn't have a television in our house until I was 10. So we were forced to learn how to talk and tell stories and answer questions and bring forth opinion. He said, my great uncle, since my dad had passed away before I was born, my great uncle was at the head of the table every day. And everyone, including the kids, were included in the conversation. We were not lectured to. We listened to stories. We listened to the way things develop over time. I said that creates in you a whole sense of organizing your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions so that you can be a community. And you can learn civil discourse and learn how to be a responsible member of the family, even though you're only 5 or 6. And ultimately a responsible citizen. So I think that's what the writing community does and what it should do and what we need to completely encourage and bring forth. One of the things we talk about is what are the younger people doing about poetry. Some people lament. I do not. I went to the UNL Monthly Slam. You should go to the UNL Monthly Slam. There were 75 people there in the audience. They winnowed down the list of people that wanted to read to 10. They had to draw a name out of a hat in order to get it to 10 for the first round, 5 for the second round, 3 for the third round. Everyone read or delivered from memory a wonderful piece of writing with emotion and gestures and pleading and entreaty and it was magnificent. It was everything from the center of their lives to the center of their friends' lives, and it was a conversation. Essentially, that's what went on. It lasted for 2 hours. It's what poetry is becoming, and I think it's alive and I think it's growing. UNL is doing a wonderful job with that. So with that, I'll go into some poems. I don't just read, I usually talk about them. Sometimes people say, well, you shouldn't have to say much about a poem. It might be self-explanatory. I always think it helps to say a few things here and there before you begin. I've written a lot of poems in the past 10 years about my mother and father, and I think that maybe if you haven't written them about your mother and father, that maybe you should, because that's a part of putting down the story in case they die and you don't have much of a story. And that happens time and time again. This afternoon I stopped up at the hospital and my friend Mark Fairchild, some of you know Mark and Sarah. Sarah is in the hospital very acutely ill with pneumonia and a host of other things. And she is very desperately ill. And Mark is, of course, very worried and the family has gathered. That should be enough there to spur you to remember that each day is a precious gift and each day you're vertical. You should be approaching that with joy, not with dread, okay? Let's have fun with the world. This is one I wrote for my father. I wrote it while I was down visiting. My dad was taking care of my mom at that time, who was very acutely suffering from Alzheimer's, and it was a very difficult time for him. It's called Seeing My Father in Sleep. Near dawn in Burleson, Texas. I am up early, as Texas is not Nebraska, so being there is a disjuncture in time and space, which is why I rise early. The sun is just creeping through the birch. Texas, not Nebraska, so I shuffle chill-footed past the kitchen counter, snag an apple, open the back door onto the patio where the sun sits daintily on the eastern horizon. It's Dad's patio, a small square of concrete inset into the east end of the house, covered with a thin white aluminum shell, 2 easy loungers and a table, all facing our Texas version of the big yellow orb. It's all matter-of-factness surrounding the warm light coming straight in from the horizon, filling the patio, oozing around the house, then on west to Granbury or Tucumcari. A warm light filling the furniture with lightness, weightlessness, as if I am suddenly in space, orbiting the Earth at 23,000 miles or so. The apple in my hand might float up with this, I say to no one. I might fill the sky as a kite might fly out to the end of its string and dangle there. As it is, I am floating free, yet tethered by the thin wisp of an idea. I no longer feel the chair pressing back, grounding me into the bare fact of Dad, rising now, leading Mom to the bath where she will stare at the shower and will not want to get in there, and will turn with unfamiliar eyes to accuse my father of treason, of infamy. So the world gathers weight again as I float back down and prepare for the morning. Well, how can I prepare? I had stopped on my way to the patio, seeing my father asleep in the recliner, his mouth open to the room, a momentary peace enfolding him. Now the world awakes to the idea of normalcy as an untested theory, which will be cast into the pit when my mother's eyes open. This world now is done. I wrote this for a friend of mine, you may know Kelly Madigan. A couple of years ago, she decided that she would walk across Nebraska. She said it would be the easy way. It would be north to south across the Panhandle. And I said, easy way? It's still 210 miles, give or take a few yards. 210 miles north to south if you start out somewhere out there around Gordon, Nebraska, up north of Gordon. But she did walk it, and she walked it in cowboy boots, which is I cannot believe. I mean, she did that, and it was in summer. On top of that, she didn't carry a pack. Okay, so she was loafing, right? She is not a loafer. She did not loaf. So, almost across the canyon, almost across the world, from Madigan on her long walk. She's got some go in her, this girl, walking migratory, whimsical. This is no dream. It being a dream would mean that she is not here when she truly is here all the time now. This is the long moment of excruciating melody, a slow careen through a better, more full-fledged, more flighty traveling. She gathers and gives out, grows soft, her arms wider than ever, gathers in and gives a little. A sigh, a long pause between footfalls, and then one foot after another across the soft veldt, the pelt of westernmost Nebraska. The membrane, the meniscus, the skin across the frail bones of this landscape. Her feet feel bare by now, as if shoes are as thin as the skin of the earth she paces. She feels every bone of this place through its impossible thin skin. Every bone of this earth sends back a vibratory call and response to her footfall, even as almost simultaneously her own body strikes its one deep chord of calling, of harmony, of song. Walking the bones, walking the bones, melody ringing this earth so close, a mother now, at last. That's for Kelly. This one is a little more free form. It's just maybe a meditation or some thoughts on where I was on this particular day. So I guess you can fit it into anything that might fit for you. Hey, Mike. Upon having passed the fork in the road, I am now wondering. Numberless, the motes on the air move about and around me. Mum, oblivious, reacting to the faint electrical discharge caught within the saline streams of capillary and vein and artery. This dust moves, or I do, each of us caught in the cyclodean rhythm, which is either an explanation or a celebration of the human spirit. Or I am merely being overtaken by a small cloud of dust, finite and numberless in the air, on the occasion of nothing and no one. What glee awaits and doom, and utter gray hours waiting for more of less until it is nothing at all. Or perhaps I am wrong with this. He is safe. I am grieved for almost nothing. Or perhaps I am numberless, mum as a mote tossed in this infinite air, reaching, clad only in the thin skein of electrical discharge. I am a small body on fire with learning. This is a poem I wrote for a friend of mine who called me, and he was in abject despair. It was very hard to listen to, and yet I took notes. And somebody said, oh, you take notes on this, this man's suffering, and so you can write about suffering, and people will think it's interesting, and it's a great poem. And I said, no. I read the poem back to him, and then talked about what had changed since then. And things had gotten better, even though at the time he felt that it really could not. So this is actually a poem of hope if you take it in all of what's involved with this piece. He had his phone or his watch set to chirp and remind him to take his pills. He says it seems like it beeps all the time, when actually it's maybe every 8 or 10 hours, who knows. So it's titled, Each Hour the Watch Chirps, Twice. Each time a surprise, yet a recognition. Those two notes always the same, never the same, an echo. Those two notes stitch the night together, one four-sided square hour to the other and another, patch and piece, thread and needle. And the air tightens too, pulls closer, shrinking in the lack of light 2 a.m. Now there begins a hum, a sub-audio vibratory. Sound is colored, really, oft-white, almost colorless, with the sheen and hue of a grain of rice, one grain in the palm of the hand under any sunlit sky of the last 10,000 years. Now this pattern of the moment impresses. Now I raise my head at the sound, realize I'm sitting, sleeping, hands asleep, the keyboard still, but vibrating in sync with that grain of rice, that sound that continues as a few bold lines on the shimmering air. Again, I'm sliding into awareness in the middle of something, hours after a stupefied wander out of bed, down to the light, gathering milk, gathering bread. Hours after another small try at cognizance, another small stab at lucidity and grace. What I got is this sure sign of impermanence, this clarion call to frail morbidity in the face of failing, this slump and sleep in spite of all I want and wish. The bread is stale, the milk sour, the vertebrae caught in the dissonance of lock and groan. All that I had wondered and mused has fled. All that I prayed has fallen around my feet, cold, misshapen, spent. Weary, wilted, undependable. So I sit here on the floor, hold on to my knees and stare. Is there any wonder left that can hold me long enough, as I hold it within, both arms tight to my chest, both eyes locked straight on, pleading for clarity and imagination? This one is about when you're walking down the street. Some of you remember what it was like when Lincoln actually had downtown storefronts, or maybe you've been to a city that still has downtown storefronts. You walk along, they have a big glass wall. It's called a window. You look inside and there are appliances or refrigerators or people, mannequins really, standing there with clothes on. Kind of a shocking experience, you know, something you don't see much anymore. Maybe a few times. So this is something that happened when I was walking along, looking into windows. I still see my father after all these days, for my dad on this Father's Day, June 2008. Walking by a nighttime storefront, windows awash with new shine stainless steel stoves, washers, refrigerators, I see my old younger self standing behind my new older self, feeling the flip as windows began becoming a mirror, becoming a slow opening door, as I'm waking beside the hope spelled out by the signs in the windows, selling promises of seeing myself again in your eyes, as the door opens to 1964, Norfolk, Nebraska, to the dining room of my younger days, where after a week on the road, you, Dad, are in the kitchen, slicing carrots and chopping greens, frying pan sizzle and crock pot steam winding up around your voice, singing out that high Kansas rendition of When the Moon Hits Your Eye Like a Big Pizza Pie. So I stand there, stand here, seeing my face melt into the window pane of the storefront, selling stoves and refrigerators where just a moment ago, I swear you were singing to the vegetables, waltzing with Mom, sloughing off the tiredness of 500 miles to get here. 1964 Nebraska, North 9th Street, 2 blocks off the avenue, both feet tapping worn-out linoleum as the moon hits the walls, shimmers ceiling tile and the nesting spoons and forks and cabinets, plates clattering. The world mattered a little more to me as the storefront faded in and out of the vision of kitchen, tripping around on the glass as I stood here, people passing by in so close proximity, seeing their own idea of a clear night on the Avenue of Dreams. On the Avenue of Dreams, I see your eyes, seeing mine, and I walk on, Father, singing with you our song, startling the passerbys, startling the street lamps, startling my own throat's reluctant harmony to the joyous task of keeping even with you as the chorus comes around again, as the carrots tumble in the pot water, as the plates arrayed so carefully around the dining room table show the lights of home again. This one is written for my daughter Erin. She died in 1978 at the age of around 18 months. It was in December, so that season is coming up. And I've read this one before. I've rewritten it a number of times. It's in small 4-line stanzas, and that really doesn't make any difference. You can't see the, can you see that? No, you can't see that. It's a poem for my daughter Erin. Between seasons, a time for gathering and parting, visiting Erin's grave in Babyland. Meadowlands, lowlands, I walked to see on each branch a dark green begin. Green spears unraveling, even as last fall's fallen goes to black. A folding, an unfolding. Spring overcomes, winter goes into spring. All is done, undone. We stand here, feet wet, sinking into newly thawed clay, as we are roots. You are here one more time, out of earth, come to greet our parting at last. Each turn of this earth brings your gravestone up in light. Some say you are light over my darkness. Some say you are still gone, still and damp as this burgeoning, flowing earth. Oh, Erin, I and we stand against the dawn, celebrate our bond, daughter and father. It is a pounding we feel. Our two hearts still beat as one. There is no stilling. My heart flowing out of me, a rivulet at a time, then back in. Your eyes flow between us. It is carrying me along as much as a wave returning to shoreline is just as moon wind pushing salt brine. Moon, moon, I mirror thee. I pass by in close orbit, yearning, as if the saline wetland of the body can respond to our transient eternity, our momentarily tangle and rush, our engagement of gears intertwined. With a rush, wind is gathered in an impossible tangle of brome grass, parading the spaces between wistful and willful. Long, lithe, green reeds bend. What little we have has returned and as swiftly returns us to our beginnings. Thank you. This is another one about my parents, about the same time as the previous one, which I guess it's impossible to believe that it's nearly 10 years ago that my father died. Those kinds of impossibilities happen every day, but I guess we're overwhelmed by the numbers of impossibles, and so we kind of let some of them slip. This is called One More Phone. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am a son, talking to his father. I do this nearly every day, even though my dad died nearly 10 years ago. There is much that we have not yet said to each other. I will recall from memory that last call, the last real one, of late May 2006. His voice was thinned out by miles of wire, of worry gathering at the edges of his vision like a cataract. The phone barely vibrated in my hand, in my head, as he talked of Mom, my mom, his beautiful girl, bride these 63 years. The slow whirling of Alzheimer's had brought, finally, a peace to her, cloaked as the anonymity of self-awareness, which means, frankly, the blank stare into the blank stare of the mirror each morning for her now, as my father dresses her. She does not fight the shower anymore, nor the makeup that he draws in, making a face where there is none after the washing of the mind. Years earlier, when we were kids, we laughed as he drew cartoonish for us around the breakfast table, practicing for these days, of bringing some remembered flash of eye or line or wrinkle showing the return, even briefly, of an earlier time. There is no return. Dad breathes into the phone from Texas. Mom sits nearby, watching the television dance. I breathe back and say my part in all this, sort of a Sam Shepard play in 3 acts. This, the beginning of the third, where Sam always puts the audience into his pocket, the one inside his worn gray suede coat, inside the lapel, next to the heart. From here, I can hear the beating, intermingled with my father's soft heart voicing into the phone, mixing with my own blood pulse tympani of the ear. It is getting hard, son, he says. It is getting hard. I cannot find the page in this light in the script. The script falls from my hand as I look off camera for direction. There is none. We had an assignment a long time ago in one of Greg Kuzma's classes. I think Greg's class has inspired thought that echoes and ricochets for a long time now. And those ideas of writing about some of his encouragements are just paramount in my mind. He was so forceful. He was so absolutely overwhelming. And at the same time, so much our friend. that you couldn't help but not want to write something about what he suggested. So he talked about the idea of near sleep or near awake, that transition time between your dreams and your body being unconscious, or whatever it is that happens when we sleep. And then as you come out of that into the world, there's a mixing and a melding, and things get mixed up and tied together and torn apart. He said, what is that? What are you then? Who are you? What kind of a being are you? Where do you live? At what point in the history of the world are you existing at that moment? Are you here? Or are you a million years ago stuck in some part of your reptile brain? How does that work? So I call this one Released into the Wild. Just before the eyes open, just before the body finds itself in its rented room, just before the scream forms and dissolves, before it can get out of the body, just before the clock face makes some sort of curious sense, just before the room points to up and down as concepts to listen to, just before colors pin their name tags on, just before the visible secret shares again that all you've collected in your myriad pockets on the trail from eyelid to eardrum to the otherness, just before two words finish explaining what makes them different from each other and what makes them the same, before reason and consciousness fill the body like hot gas jumping into a hot air balloon, like the moment of ignition above an everyday piston traveling its pathway up and down, up and down, up and down, like the busy drawing of your face upon the blackboard of just this instant. This is where you gather what you want to save and make it into another dawn bird. Watch as feathers grow, as the new heart begins, as it opens its eye for the first time. Each recognizes each other, you and the bird, as two parts of one part, two parts of many parts, so that as you raise this bird to the dawn, it already knows to fly from here to the end of this day, carrying your secrets until the world slows again. So you can open the window this evening as you close your eyes, gathering wings and two eyes that burn like stars, like all you've known about homecoming. So I guess that's one aspect of what it may be like to wake up, and then what happens to all those dreams and those thoughts and those hopes and everything that when you were 4 and it had come out and had gone away. I don't know. Maybe it does do something like that. This one's a little hard to read, but I'll read it. It's a few years ago I found a videotape. Yes, it's a VHS tape. I still have a playing unit, whatever you want to call that thing. I can hook it up to the TV again if I want to and watch this. If my TV has RCA jacks on the back, I'm not sure. Everything is becoming less connected with the old. I think that's what that's telling you. And that's kind of a shame. So this video was one that we had made for my parents' 50th anniversary at the party. And my mother was talking to us and telling us a little bit about herself and about her family. So it was difficult to watch that again just a few years ago. After she had gone through so many years of Alzheimer's, she wasn't that person anymore, and I had forgotten who my mother was. I had really forgotten the absolute detail and clarity of a story coming out of her lips and listening to her accent, her rural Missouri accent. Watching the video of my mother, their 50th anniversary, looking at her, talking like that, out of her throat, her mother's slow Missouri ways of saying, "She is my mother," this woman speaking. Yet I do not see her now as I saw her then. The moving pictures move me different, more raw, unfocused, with a stutter in my stepping through the screen to sit there, near her as she tells me how it was, how it is then. And yet, even as she speaks, even as we speak here, the present dissolves into the slow Missouri of the past, a river as well as a way of saying a river, a landing alongside the waters as they curl around a leaf or a limb, pull it down, right as it passes in front of me, as if it wasn't even there before this turn of events, this calculated way of replaying again and again what might never really have been. I am the face looking back out of the relaxed brown turbulence, knowing I can't see through any better than I can see through thin air. I am not the face of reason or light. All I am seeing here on the television screen is what I never realized was there the years ago moment I held the video camera, half watching my mother tell me how her life had gone so far, how her mother's voice was on only one short film from years ago, saying something about the weather as her eyes said something about the state of her family around her in 1958 California. The eucalyptus swaying in the background, us grandchildren streaking to be seen, the slow afternoon winding all that up in a neat roll of celluloid and dream. I was only half there, watching, my mother telling me hello and goodbye, and holding me tightly in her eyes as I listened for the end of the tape coming up, so I could move on to another scene. So I see this scene, my mother there, here, looking right through me, reading me as much now as she did then. As much a calling out as a calling forth, as much a hand soft on the shoulder as a whisper in this room. And I know the end of the tape is coming, and I can't do anything at all. Larry Levis said any really moving, connected poem, anything that absolutely grabs you and holds you, whether it's free form or straight narrative or a recall of the past, anything like that is transcendent in its own way, is more of an elegy. And it's, as the moment passes, as the moment we're in now passes, whatever you remember of it and put together down the road, it may be really a tribute to what has happened and where it's all gone. And I'll read this one. Paul said I should read it. It's a long poem. I'll use this one to finish. I know you've heard it before, but they had the benefit of having a copy in their hand, so it's a little difficult. It starts out talking about what a father does to teach your son some of the things about the things that you need to do to become a man in order to wear the shirt, put on the tie, how to button the buttons, how everything has to line up. So I better get a drink before I read this one. This is called Weather, or Weather, Whether. I go back to that part of my life where Dad shows me how to put on a shirt, a tie, a suit, the ordinary order required of an older boy. Whether to do it or not, whether to manufacture out of the ripped, construct a whole out of parts coming in by the current, whether lean into the corrugations, the relief map raised up from nothing but the rude gesture of this life ignoring all but a smattering of yours. Twist against the ropes you tied yourself, mapping onto this body you raised yourself. That flesh, self-taught to walk upright, unflinching. Then you give it to the world, that ribbon of unwinding that became you. You gave it a sharp shake to unfurl the sails, catch a driving gale, unwinding. Whether to go on, crash the craft works you've given yourself, re-sew face with a razor into smoothness temporary as string tied around a finger. The mirror remembers only the present moment as that one shirt in the closet on a wire hanger. A wire hanger. My father took his few good things to the cleaners for laundering, pressing, came back to the house with those crisp iron button-downs swinging to every change in the balance. A soft jangle given out as a sign of protest to the indignity of the trip, the transportation, to be locked in the solitary of his closet. Each hanger thrown away as he dressed each morning. Fresh shine of an early, orderly start. Button moves through buttonhole, round through that seam in the world of cloth, that avenue in the center of his life. He wore that row of buttons like a string of prayer beads down the seam of his chest that would be opening soon to the gentle persuasion of his doctor's knife. He went on with the automatic motion of fingering, finding each tiny roundness fitting itself through the yield of cloth, giving way to a higher reality. This going in and going through, the giving up of shape and order momentarily to a press and caress of the slim art of expediency, followed by the crisp evangelism of a new way fabric becomes the firmament. I take these memories, fit them in an unconscious stream of small interruptions on the day. Find the key dangling the tips of my fingers, shove it through gently to leave a pattern of orderly assembly on the other side, to leave an invisible marking of the open door, the unlocked cabinet, an unbound heart. The unclad armature waiting the freeing cloak of clay, squeezed into places the world is wanting. Fractures the world is waiting. I wait to that want to will me into another bright, crisp unveiling, me standing in my father's shirt, willing the mirror to show him behind the buttons too, in here with me. Our feet in the same places, ready to march off to a war the world brings with surgery, with calamity, with the turning of all Nesternia to follow the sun in its compact progression across the unbending sky. I wrench myself away from my own machinery of wiles, manipulatory lists going on with an empty progression designed to self-destruct upon the rising of a newer sun. I call out for a refill of my own prescription scrawled on the palm of my right hand with bright red ink, words holding me tight in a rapt desperation of attentiveness or dread. I don't know which or what or how, but still I read that I must button each, save the logical referent given by this last starched 100% cotton shirt hanging on the closet pole as we clean out the difficulty, the intrusion of all these things caught up in the way of my father dying, my father dead in 3 minutes and 29 seconds from the last clot slipping into the buttonhole of an artery not quite big enough to let it continue or dissolve. The artery given this simple instruction: shut down the order and clarity of a well-functioning emporium of flesh, bone, and intentional willpower that moved my father along the path of caring for my mother well past the point she had wanted or willed or wished her way in this life. Shut it down good and proper. Slip out of the grip of order, go bad into chaos caught with the order of cacophony. The twin infringements of defibrillator paddles scorching the fine curled gray hair on his chest, his eyes following or not following, a plunge beneath the breastbone of a hypodermic filled with last chances mixed liberally with last choices. The hospital room vibrating in white, walls oscillating as if the room breathed for him, with him, continuing beyond any continuance, form and continuance and imperative bring to a contrivance of order, of rule, of law. So, the button, and the button. I do so, move this round into that ovoid eruption in the circumstance of cloth, that long trailing tatter and triumph of tailoring, as I gasp and grasp more of this. Fight for a fuller, more complete engagement with meaning and form and order, and more this entire row and sequence, and an engagement of the master plan, a manner of official prescription and advice, to give the wearer a semblance well-centered, well-fashioned onto a mainstream promise to carry and nurture the well-tailored, well-shod, well-intentioned citizen of this planet on plan to decorate more days with his presence. I do so. I button, I smooth, I fasten one finger around another with a small roundness gathered in between, and roll it through the immediacy of a buttonhole, anchoring one side of this to the other, making a flattened shirt thing into a tube of me, arms already in, fingers going on in some ancient dance, some kind of rosary, some unbidden behavior brought on my me wanting me inside of this, the second skin once worn by my father. I stand, deliver one look to the other in the mirror who wants me to go on with this, even though there is a certainty of some harsh probability table pressing into the eye as it calmly recites my faith. I repeat each word afloat on the surface of the retina, swimming upstream into the cavity of the personal brain, writing a wish list of hopes and utterances into collision with the brainstem, a curious collusion of fantasy and fact sheet giving me newer data to assimilate, to poll, to pawn, to ponder. What sits here with me on the bench in the center of some cerebral parkland is realization, looking somewhat like my father's buddy Ken from Medical 101st Airborne, somewhere near June of 1944, or later somewhere near June of 2010. I talk to Kenny and he tells me. He points out the humor, futile necessity, or blind obedience to a principle looking nowhere but to put one more foot in front of the other, backpack getting weightier, boots harvesting microns more of mud each time they pocket along French hillsides, in and out of ditches, through hedgerows, boots hang as pendulums on the twin I-beams given as legs, legs given more and more to bear up until the bullet or hand grenade or an incendiary bomb finds the mark of the airborne he wore, the mark of Geronimo finding itself giving flesh a continually promised, soon to be delivered home in a box. And Kenny in California in 2010 leans closer to me. You can hear that low laugh coming out of him. He sees how all of this, the rows and rows of hedgerows dividing Brittany, France into flooded fields, the rows and rows of storm clouds invisible in this darkness, rows and rows of tanks of desecration, despair, angle, lust, roll on. A crushing machine, almost silent from here, almost invisible in the steady light of morning in 2010. But Ken is still leaning in, talking, keeping us awake, focusing on the task of keeping promise one, getting home and telling me about it. Keeping promise two, getting this mired boot up, getting it in the long swing forward, feeling it sink again, pulling blind against suction, against gravity, against time trying to bring itself to a stop, to a dead stop here and rest. So here we are in France, my brother and I, in 2012. There are rows and rows. We see them here on the battlefields near Caen, near St. Mary-Glise, the soil of France, a quilt of bluegrass, exactly following dictates of hill and dale, a covering uniformly quiet, uniformly sprinkled with crosses, somehow to maintain order, somehow maintaining a faith in the power of geometry multiplied by attrition times 10. Times 10. Somehow maintaining a blunt face directly into the morning sun without flinching, somehow finding an orderly band of bravado decked out in a simple bluster of keeping solid with one another, even unto death, even unto life that goes on with a death promise carried in a thin leather song around the neck, an amulet, a medicine bag, filled with the fine powder of the rags that bones become in the grave, in a tore-up earth opened by the surprise of an artillery shell blossoming. The body given like a seed to the planting time in 1944, somewhere near Carentan, somewhere near Vagel. You catch the wave still, over and over, row upon row of pressure pushing this present light back into that past darkness, which goes on over and over as you are, as we are paying attention closely, gathering the bits of soil and flesh blown about, still traveling in the slow arc of not forgetting that I maintain, we solemnly swear is still upon us. Within the bones we wear in secret memorial to our fathers and mothers scattering before the winds. Rose and rose, Kenny said. Stock still, yet moving into view whenever I remember mine and yours and ours. Somehow we maintain, till, harvest, plant, row on rows. Yes, there are rows and rows here showing themselves as a delicate streaming, a gather and knit, an assembly of the unbidden, uncharted until now as a working test of my will to forget, bombarded by his will to be remembered. Please consider the leaves, the grass, pulling a thin sheet over themselves each morning. Whether the dark or snow or a haze of dust blown in from Kansas, I want you to consider the sound coming out of here, the slow rhythm of each syllable buttoning itself to your ear, the infinitely random order of what will happen next if you let yourself go on. I am barely here, bringing in his clothes out of my car from Texas. I have cleaned out the closets, shelved the boxes, pitched innumerable white, crisp bags into the dumpster painted green stenciled "Give to the Army," Salvation Army. I have saved this one shirt on its one wire hanger, left that way because my father did not dress himself that morning. The undertaker took clothes we brought, fashioned each hasp and snap and button crisply into themselves, arranged the collar around a tie he always left tied in his drawer. I find this shirt still on its metal hanger, one left he hadn't himself put on, then gone out for another ordinary day of caring for his wife. She, after he had bathed her, she protested, pushing, hitting. She, sitting on the bed, waiting without knowing it was waiting, sitting without knowing it is sitting. Mother, you are sitting, waiting. Still, you are in the Alzheimer Cares facility, waiting. I look here at my hands coming out of my own sleeves, his shirt I've harvested, carried, hung here in the back of the closet until now, this morning, mimicking the way he showed me, shows now. Dad dresses himself, dresses me. I dress myself, looking at his fingers in the mirror, following the rows of buttons as they go toward the buttonholes. Now fasten, now fasten, now fasten, now done.
Rick Walton. Thank you for reading that, Rick.